all these people are coming and say, hey, like, I need help with design. And we're just like, why are you coming to us so late? It's like if folks built buildings and after the building was already constructed, they're like, hey, do you know an architect that can help us with this building? Like, the building is already constructed and like off. Like, why are you coming so late?
Until Designer Fund was founded by Enrique Allen and Ben Blumenrose, venture capital investment rarely considered design strategy. Companies like Stripe, Notion, Gusto, and Omada Health, all in the Designer Fund portfolio, see design as a competitive advantage and a tool for acquiring and retaining customers. We talked with Enrique Allen about the tremendous value design is creating in these and many other companies.
We spoke with Enrique about how they chose design as an investment lens, the changing role of design from when they started until now, why venture capital might not always be the best way to fund a startup business, and how they think about finding good partners and co-founders.
And by the way, if you're starting a design-centric company and you're seeking investment, Designer Fund is investing up to $1 million for pre-seed and Series A startups. To learn more and apply for funding, visit designerfund.com/partnership. Be sure to apply by October 4th, 2024.
This is Design Better, where we explore creativity at the intersection of design and technology. I'm Eli Woolery.
And I'm Aaron Walter. You can get ad-free episodes, bonus content, discounted workshops, and access to our monthly AMAs with big names in design and tech by becoming a Design Better premium subscriber. And it's also the best way to support the show. Visit designbetterpodcast.com/subscribe to learn more.
Also, stay tuned after the interview for a special look at Wix Studio, the intuitive way for agencies and enterprises to design exceptional sites with full-stack business solutions, multi-site management, and built-in AI. We chat with Kyle Prinsloo, founder of ClientManager.io, about why he loves Wix Studio for its efficient tools like the Figma to Wix Studio plugin and robust email marketing features, which have greatly improved his workflow and client engagement.
We'll return to the conversation after this quick break. Eli and I are super pumped to be joining our friends at User Testing at the Human Insight Summit in Austin, Texas this October, the 28th through the 30th. It's an event that will help you learn how to bring customer insights closer to the product design process. And I got to tell you, the speaker lineup is inspiring. And Eli and I will be recording a live episode of Design Better on stage with User Testing CEO Andy McMillan. 500 builders and creators will be there from some of the largest and most innovative brands in the world for a 3-day event focused on transforming the way products and experiences are built. You're going to make so many great connections there while honing your skills. And it's Austin, one of our favorite cities in the world. So right now, snag your ticket at usertesting.com/designbetter and use the code DesignBetter50 and you'll get half off your ticket. That's 50% off of your admission. Eli and I would love to meet you in person in Austin. Come see us and come meet us at the Human Insight Summit in Austin, Texas. We can't wait to see you there. Visit usertesting.com/designbetter and use code DesignBetter50 for half off your ticket. Last week, I woke up to a rather scary email from one of my banks telling me that my personal information had been compromised by a big data breach. I'm still in the process of dealing with this. Turns out that every year, both the number and scope of data breaches worldwide are rising. According to the 2022 annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, the number of victims has gone up nearly 41.5% from 2021. There are hundreds of commercial databases and people search sites that hold your personal info, and the number grows every year. Data brokers aggregate your personal information, including your name, your social security number, your login credentials, home address, location history, online activity, and a whole lot more. All of this is available for purchase by businesses and could fall into the hands of criminals. So how am I dealing with this? Well, I set up an Incogni account. Incogni reaches out on your behalf, requesting your personal data removal and deals with any objections that come up. Just within 5 minutes of me setting up my account with Incogni, they had issued 84 data removal requests. They got my info deleted from 35 sites and suppressed future data collection on me from 18 sites. Plus, they cleaned my phone number from a bunch of spam callers, and I'm very excited about that. And I'm just impressed with what I'm seeing already from Incogni. It's a great, great service. You should probably do this too. Use promo code DesignBetter at incogni.com/designbetter to get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/designbetter. Use the code DesignBetter to get 60% off an annual plan and get your personal info off of the web. And now, back to the show. Enrique Allen, welcome to Design Better.
Hey guys, I'm stoked to be here.
Enrique, we met so long ago. You were teaching a class at Stanford. You invited me to come in and do a little guest lecture thing. So we got to hang out, which was super fun. And I think that was right at the beginning when you were starting to think about starting Designer Fund, which is a very unique type of venture capital firm. Let's just start from the ground. Tell us a little bit about Designer Fund and what you do.
In terms of the origin of Designer Fund, it's not like I grew up and was like, hey, I want to be a VC one day, or, I want to be one of these guys walking around with a vest on, Sand Hill Road. Right? Like, I never had that intention. Growing up in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, there was actually a lot of exposure to design and tech. And it's just, across the bridge from Stanford. And so I really felt lucky that I discovered the web through BJ Fogg, where I did research at the Stanford Persuasive Tech Lab. And that really opened my eyes to the power of how people respond to computers in similar ways that they respond to people. And I was actually part of this Facebook class, which took advantage of the Facebook platform, which was just opening up, and we got something like 10 million users in 10 weeks across, my classmates' projects. And it was something that I don't think ever will happen again. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any other class that's had that kind of reach. Of course, with mostly spammy, apps. And I built a status app that has a lot of the features that you now see on Twitter and X that we take for granted. Through this class, it really opened my eyes to the power of social web and the ability to impact millions of people around the world. And so it's kind of this first aha moment. But again, at that time, it wasn't clear yet what design really was. The D school was just starting at the time. And so I snuck in and found a way to get into classes before grad school. And it wasn't really until I was walking around after this class presentation and a venture capitalist from Benrock came over and said, hey, we love what you're building. Why don't you come join us at Benrock and help build apps? And I was like, sure, you'll pay me and you'll give me food. And so that just really got my foot into the door of this intersection of design and venture. So I worked underneath the senior designer formerly of Apple and PM engineers, and we incubated a number of apps and really just kind of snowballed from there. It's kind of a crazy story, but after that experience at Benrock, as I was going back to grad school, I was literally biking off of University Ave, Lytton, the parallel street, and ran into a VC. Dave McClure was like, hey, what are you doing for the summer? I'm like, I don't know. I don't have plans yet. And, he invited me to join Facebook Fund. And I was like, that sounds cool. Sure. But again, it's not like I thought hey, I should bring design to the masses yet. It was just really just starting to get exposed to this building companies really from the ground up, from 0 to 1, this earliest phases. And that's where I started to see at Facebook Fund, there are some companies and founders that approach building differently. Some that, have amazing technology that are kind of searching for a customer. And there's some other folks that are really more human-centered and that are kind of applying some of the design thinking stuff that I was learning at the D school. And they seem to be onto something. So I remember working with Logan and John, founders of Zimride, which turned into Lyft, the car sharing service you guys might have heard of. It was incredible how customer-centric they were. They would take rides with the users, from Berkeley all the way down to LA. And that's when it started to click that, oh, wow, maybe I can bring some of these design thinking methods and apply them to early stage startups to help founders be more customer centric and better understand who they're ultimately building for. And so from there, it just kind of snowballed, and I helped Dave start 500 Global from the ground up after that experience at Facebook. We also made a lot of money at the Facebook fund and, returned that fund multiple times over. So I also got to experience sort of the power of backing companies really early and seeing them grow, this kind of power law distribution that you guys may have heard of. And so it's like, hey, all right, well, let's run this back and try it again at a bigger scale with 500 Global. So we literally had no website, no site, no space, no fund. And so I really got to see how I could start to apply design, not just to individual companies like Lyft, but also to designing the organization and the experience so that we can help accelerate many more companies. And, just fast forwarding a little bit, it was amazing to be able to work with companies all over the world, and particularly companies that were like outsider founders that maybe didn't fit the Silicon Valley bill of, they went to certain schools or worked at certain companies. So, little companies like TalkDesk now, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, we came from Portugal, and we got a chance to work closely and help facilitate some design sprints with them as an example, and many others. And so that started to kind of turn my eyes like, hey, we really can infuse design much earlier. And more people are coming to me like, hey, I need help with this. I'm like, oh my God, I don't scale. I can't parachute into working with all these companies on my own. This isn't sustainable. One designer working with 20, 30 plus companies a batch, right? And so I started to kind of reflect on that. And similarly, my co-founder was having a similar experience. He was one of the fifth product designers who joined Facebook at the time, from college campuses all the way up to scaling to 1 billion users with Facebook Timeline. And all these people are coming and say, hey, I need help with design. And we're just like, why are you coming to us so late? It's like if folks built buildings and after the building was already constructed, they're like, hey, do you know an architect that could help us with this building? Like, what? The building is already constructed, off. Why are you coming so late? And so, we knew each other from while I was at Facebook Fund, and we started to experience this. And so we started to ask ourselves, why don't more companies have great design and the DNA of their companies? Why are all these companies getting funded with shitty design? We don't get it. And so we interviewed tons of founders, interviewed tons of investors, and really tried to get at sort of the core of this. And what we realized is a number of big gaps. One, there was just a design talent gap. So literally just not that many designers who also want to be founders or are ready or prepared to be founders. Two, there is also a big education and awareness gap, not just amongst designers, but among investors and PMs and other people around the importance and value of design. And then third, there was also a capital gap. So most of the VCs, most folks that are writing checks have engineering or business backgrounds. They don't have design backgrounds or haven't had design roles. And so it's almost like reluctantly, we're like, gosh, I guess we're in a good position after we've been advising companies and angel investing to maybe raise our first fund. Initially, we're like, hey, maybe we'll just raise $1 million. That sounds good. And people just kind of laughed at us $1 million, that's too small. And so it just kind of snowballed from there. But again, it really emerged from the demand that we saw at the time. And it really emerged from, us being in a unique position and having unique expertise building and scaling companies from the ground up that put us in a position to start the fund. But again, when we looked at it, we're just we didn't want to start another studio or consultancy where there's a fee for service model, which I think makes sense and works in many cases. And we refer many of our companies to freelancers and studios, but we wanted to be really part owners and long-term partners. And so the only way to really do that, right, is to be on the cap table, to have real equity and stake in the upside. So really our interests are aligned, long-term. And so we just felt that venture was the most vanilla structure to be able to do that versus trying to do some kind of complicated, we do some services, then you give us some equity and mix of cash. And it's just complicated for the customer. So what we realized is if the founders are our customers, they want the cleanest value proposition. They want the cleanest menu. And many founders, they already understand how venture works. And so we really use venture as sort of a mechanism to allow us to ultimately really work with companies on the most meaningful problems, and for us to be able to do that every day in a way that I think is aligned with our values.
So, Enrique, when I first got to know you, and you might not even remember meeting me back then, but it was, I think, around 2011, and I had just started at this accelerator called Runway that Corey Ford had started. And I remember meeting you and hearing your story. And then I was just looking at your background on LinkedIn, and I saw that you were a TA at a business school. I was like, that's interesting. It seems like a lot of people that do that end up in this kind of investment world, like the VC firm I was at, Innovation Endeavors. The managing partner, Dror, had started. He was a TA for Eric Schmidt, which is how he got his thing started. So I said, "Oh, that's interesting." But I'm curious, given how you started this in the early days, where a lot of startups and even established companies didn't really understand sort of the strategic value of design, and they thought, let's just kind of slap something on at the end. How have you seen that change over time as more and more organizations and startups recognize the value, and how's that kind of changed your approach within your fund as you advise people?
I'm sure you've had some folks on the podcast where you talk about sort of design maturity across an organization, or competency, from unconscious, incompetence to hopefully conscious or even unconscious competence. And so in a similar way, when we were first starting, people were like, oh, design is a thing? Like, oh, multi-billion dollar companies now that have been started by founders who have design backgrounds. Like, that was kind of a secret at the time. And so fast forward today, I think there's a lot more awareness that design matters. So many more investors and founders recognize that it's a key ingredient. It's not the only ingredient, but it's a key ingredient to the success of companies. We can go into more detail around that, but there's more awareness. So that's great. That's been like a big win for us. Like, we're not often like in a conversation where we're like debating, is it worth the budget to like hire a first designer or start to build out your team, right? So like, that's a huge win. Or like the importance of even making investments in, your design system or other infrastructure level things that help improve process and that kind of stuff, right? So that's huge. What we're still seeing though is a big gap in terms of like, they know that they want something, but then how do you actually execute on that? Like, how do you actually achieve those outcomes? So we have the awareness, but the actual like how to do that is still a bit of this black box. But at the startup level, it's complicated, right? The 0 to 1, it's messy, it's very iterative, like how to find product market fit. There's not like this one formula, right, that you can follow, or this one lean startup method or whatever, model that you want to follow. Like, many people try to use those things and fail, right? So I think that's a big piece at this early stage is figuring out how to actually leverage design strategically and effectively at the early stages. Once you get to the later stages, you have more data, you have product market fit, you're generating revenue, you're already at scale. Like, don't get me wrong, it's still complicated and hard, but like, there's a lot more signal, there's a lot more information, right? There's not as much of the ambiguity and triangulation that's required at the earlier stages. And so I think that's really the tricky part, and where we mostly play is just the inherent messiness of the early stages. And so that's just really hard.
So part of what you and Ben, your partner, co-founder, I'm sure often have to do is just talk about the business value of design in terms of like starting funds, building that fund, talking to startups, companies, and so forth. So you, probably more than anyone out there in the industry, can connect the dots very clearly of like dollars invested in design, value created from that. Could you walk us through what you see from your portfolio and your investments and how design creates value?
One example from one of our portfolio companies, Stripe, which is one of the largest payment platforms and financial services for both startups to companies at scale. They're really trying to increase the GDP of the internet. So they really see themselves as fundamental infrastructure. But it didn't start that way. It started really with making it super simple for a developer, for an entrepreneur, for a founder, for a builder to embed payments in their apps and abstract away so much craziness around fraud, around risk, around international challenges, et cetera. So recently, Katie Dill, who leads design there, shared a couple mini case studies around the value of design and craft. And so one example is, we all get these emails from products promoting a product, try to, get you to sign up and to convert to become a user, right? Like it's the bread and butter of how so many businesses grow is through email marketing, and Stripe's no different. So they had a, traditional sign up flow from value prop in their email. It looked like anything else that you might, see in your email. But the team said, hey, what if we like apply some love to this email CTA and see if we can, improve it? And lo and behold, they like really boost the hierarchy and make the value prop clear, the next step. And then once you click on that, the sign up flow very obvious and straightforward. So it wasn't just the email, but also, the steps afterwards. And they're able to improve not just like click-throughs, but actual people signing up and continuing to retain by 20%. Just an email, like just applying design love to like one surface area, right? And the reason I bring that up is for some people, especially as a founder, you kind of got to realize like, does it make sense to deploy limited resources, right, to surfaces like email or landing pages for marketing or decks for sales, right? And I'm telling you, there's so many examples that are just not told or publicly shared of how design can really create a return on investment there. And then a second example from Stripe is with their like new optimized checkout flow. So they basically look at all their merchants, figure out all the patterns of like what works depending on the browser, the person on mobile, where they're at, parent rails. They come up with like the most optimized checkout flow possible, and they give that away right to their merchants. They're able to improve revenue for their merchants by an average of 11.9%. So like if you're a medium-sized business or something making, let's say, $10 million a year, that's almost like 1.2 million free money because, they put some love into optimizing all the steps of the checkout, suggesting the right payment, one-click payments with link if needed, right? So there's just really concrete examples like that. Jared Spool has a great legendary example of this kind of $300 million button. Realize that a bunch of people are dropping off when they're checking out, and they start to interview and look under the hood there and realize, oh, most people who requested the password reset, only 2 out of 100 actually went through to complete the purchase. A huge, massive drop off, just leaving money like on the table. And so, credit to his team for redesigning that and proposing a solution of like check out as guests. And they calculated the potential revenue, and it turns out to be a $300 million like improvement. So that's just kind of like the tip of the iceberg, I would say, in terms of the value design. These are just examples, especially in e-commerce where it's easier to measure, right? But I think there's a deeper sort of iceberg there all the way down to the fundamental design strategy and research to focus on which customers and what segments to go after, right? All the way up to, the overall experience that you're trying to create. So, Airbnb recently had a great response to COVID. They recognized, revenue was way down. So Brian consolidated resources, mapped out, I think, 150 screens of their ideal experience, and then went along like systematically to map, feedback from the customers, bugs that we're getting, all that, and map that to each of those to this kind of service blueprint. And so again, that's like deeper strategy. That's not just like, hey, we're trying to optimize one email campaign or just one checkout flow, right? That's across the entire experience. So then you kind of bubble up, as you guys know, getting into more of the interaction layer and the UI layers and the information architecture, and finally to kind of the visual and brand and stuff that people see. But our thesis really is that when we talk about, again, the real value design is how can we use design strategically across all of those levels of the business? Again, from not just within product, but can we use design to help with sales? Can we help design with recruiting? Can we help use design to leverage employee satisfaction and culture, right? So can we kind of apply the similar kind of thinking, but to these other cross-functional teams? And I think that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck. So I think McKinsey, published some work a while ago around, the design index. I thought one of the most interesting takeaways there was that companies that like really invested in design, both at like the leadership level in terms of other measures that they had, they saw kind of the biggest gains versus companies that just kind of, did some design, sprinkled some design love on things, but didn't see as big of a gain. And so kind of what I kind of intuited there unscientifically was that, oh yeah, maybe if you really want to differentiate, kind of really need to commit to that being a core part of strategy, right? And so we're looking to invest in companies where if they do invest in design as a core part of their strategy, that can ultimately help create bigger and better business outcomes.
Yeah, let's go a layer deeper. I love that you're talking about design not from the perspective of aesthetics, but from strategy and interaction design, all these different layers of the product and the business. The one area that seems to be very well served is any product in the business to consumer space. So we're selling to consumers. It's pretty easy to pitch like, hey, if we invest in design, that changes the way people feel about our product. They are more likely to purchase and or they are more likely to spend more. We can see that with examples of like a BMW versus a Honda Fit. The value prop there with design, not that a Honda Fit is not well designed, but it's designed in a little different way than a BMW. But business to business is a different type of animal. And I hear this a lot in the work that I've done with B2B companies and product teams that while it's just another business that's using this, so it doesn't really matter if it's well designed. I wonder, can you poke a hole in that awful line of reasoning that just resurfaces all the time like a zombie that just won't die? And I'll toss this out that Gusto is a B2B company that is in your portfolio that maybe they have a different approach.
First off, I think we have to admit and have the humility that many companies will succeed and be huge from financial perspective or from other metrics without. It's just a fact. So part of it is like there are multiple ways to serve customers to get to the, some top of some mountain. There's multiple paths to get there. And so there are definitely examples in our portfolio where we had a head to head. Our company had the better product, have a higher NPS, higher satisfaction, all those things. But a competitor grew faster because they were like super honed in on their sales process and just really built for commercial B2B, to your point, from the ground up. And they just got 10x evaluation and enterprise value of the result. And for me, that was just a really humbling example of, again, like the best product doesn't always win. If you build something amazing, people just aren't going to come, right? Like it's also like the secret behind Google. Like, oh yeah, Google's so simple. You just have this like landing page and, just type into this one box. But it's like, do you know how many sales folks are on the Google team? Like, do you know how many thousands of folks are calling SMBs and other folks to make sure that they use Google products? Oh, you don't see those people behind that little search box, right? And so I think you bring up a really valid point that for B2B, often there's a particular challenge where sometimes the buyer isn't the end user, right? And so that dynamic creates interesting potential misalignment around incentives. So to give you an example of in our portfolio, Gusto, when we looked at investing, it was like, hey, there's ADP, Paychex at the time, multi-billion-dollar companies publicly. But when we dug into it, we interviewed folks, realized, wow, people hate these products. Like they do not want to use them. And you look at their NPS, you look at their BB rating, et cetera, and it was pretty clear that they were serving larger customers, right, with more complex needs, and they weren't serving companies with, let's say, 200, 300 employees or less. And so Gusto really saw this opportunity to kind of pioneer a bit of a bottoms up motion, right? We hear like product-led growth and all these things are like common now, but like, hey, we can actually create something simple enough that a small business, even like ourselves, could sign up without having the expertise of HR and payroll and all those things. And so, yes, there's going to be B2B situations that are more complicated than Gusto, but there's also going to be many opportunities that are B2B where maybe we can capture a different segment that doesn't need all the like bells and whistles and super complicated configurations and stuff. And we can kind of strip that down to something that really is more purpose built for that company. And I think Gusto has done a tremendous job of that. They've also done a number of things like even investing in their brand, right? Like what's the value of investing in your brand, right? They used to be Zen Payroll and they went through a whole rebranding process of like controversial, like they're growing fast. Or like, gosh, should we like bite the bullet right now and like rebrand from Zen Payroll? But they realized that no, hey, the larger vision for the company isn't just payroll, right? It's connecting across payroll to your health benefits, to ultimately employees being able to manage their time and their own wallet. And so they can increasingly get into financial services and help you with your 401k and other things, right? So there's a much more holistic view. And that was a key strategic decision that I think paid huge dividends than, if they're again, just kind of narrowly boxed into Zen Payroll. And yeah, so I think there are more examples of when you can apply design to B2B in a way that gets over this challenge of, the best product doesn't always win. So we have another company in our portfolio called Omada that builds software for architectural firms. And so you might be like, like architectural firms, like, is that really a big market? But then turns out they have direct contacts with all the general contractors and the subcontractors and are basically the hub for these massive projects that have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of value flowing through that system. And so I think when you also can focus on a specific segment, like there's kind of a phrase of like vertical SaaS, and really build something that's like purpose built for them. So like they noticed that people were using spreadsheets, right, to like track all their time. So like, hey, can we find a way of like building a simplified version to track your time and tie that to, your billing and make that super easy for the firm to manage their operations. And so that's something that's like Excel is not going to build that, like QuickBooks is not going to build that, like it doesn't make sense for them to focus on that. So I think the more that companies also can find these vertical markets that have really clear user needs, I think that's another way that they can still build something awesome that can be adopted more bottoms up and kind of get around some of the classic challenges of this disconnect between the buyer and the end user.
We'll return to the conversation after this quick break. Eli and I are big fans of learning from other creative disciplines. That's why we want to recommend another podcast for you. It's called On Set With. It's a podcast from HGTV and Max, and it takes you behind the scenes of some of the most iconic sets from the shows that changed TV history. We love how this show takes you into the creative minds who designed the sets for Friends, True Detective Season 1, I loved it, The Gilded Age, Game of Thrones, The Sopranos, White Lotus, Girls, Succession, and more. Doesn't that sound fascinating? You get to hear from the production designers, set decorators, and visual collaborators who brought these famous locations to life. It was fascinating to hear that on True Detective Season 1, the designers spent almost a year hoarding and sourcing set decor, which set the tone for that series. And from the Gilded Age set designers on how their intense research of late 1800s interiors led writers of the show to create a whole new character for the series. You can listen to On Set With on Max or wherever you get podcasts. It's time for a coffee break, and we're here with our pal, Will Schertz from Methodical Coffee, co-founder and master roaster. Will, so if we're thinking about different ways to brew coffee, what should we think about? How could we do this? And what are the best ways to brew coffee?
Yes. Okay. So you got your whole beans, you got your coffee brewer. There are so many ways to brew coffee easily. First of all, you have to make sure you have good coffee. Shameless little plug that if you go to methodicalcoffee.com, we have a vast array of offerings that you could choose from. But then you got your whole bean coffee, and then now you have to decide, do you want filter coffee, manual brew, or espresso? If you're going to brew coffee by hand, or if you're going to put coffee in a coffee pot, my general ratio is a 16-to-1 ratio. 16 parts water, 1 part coffee. the way that you would do that really quickly is if you have a gram scale, that's fantastic, because then weigh out 20 grams of coffee, multiply that by 16, and that's the amount of water that you need to pour over that coffee to have a even 16-to-1 ratio for your coffee. If you have an espresso maker at home, my favorite recipe for espresso is just a classic 2-to-1 ratio. And I try to get my extraction between 25 and 35 seconds. So however much coffee you're putting in that portafilter, pull double the amount of espresso out and try to do that in 25 or 35 seconds. But we have plenty of videos and tutorials on our website about how to brew coffee, what kind of equipment you're using and what specs you want to be looking out for. If you go to methodicalcoffee.com and look at our blog, it's in the learning section of the site. But essentially, gotta have your coffee beans, gotta have a coffee grinder and a brewing vessel. And then after that, for brewed coffee, focus on that 16-to-1 ratio with a brew time, I would say roughly about 4 minutes. And for espresso, focus on that 2-to-1 ratio and extraction time of 25 to 35 seconds. I keep that recipe as I brew coffee. And for me, the easiest way to adjust for flavor is just by slightly adjusting your grind size on your coffee grinder and seeing what the result is. And it's kind of fun to learn how to dial in on your coffee grinder. Dialing in is also another tutorial that we have on our website.
Fantastic. Will, that's great. Methodicalcoffee.com to learn more about methodical coffees, learn more about brewing, and Will has wonderful brewing guides up there. Learn more about Methodical Coffee and get some tips on how to brew the best cup of coffee at methodicalcoffee.com. Design Better is supported by our pals at LinkedIn, our favorite social network. If you do any B2B marketing, you know just how noisy the ad space can be. If your message isn't targeted to the right audience, it just disappears into the noise. But with LinkedIn ads, you can precisely reach the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. And LinkedIn's targeting capabilities can help you reach people by job title, industry, company, and more. They can do all this because LinkedIn has 1 billion members with great profiles. Through LinkedIn ads, you can start building relationships with 1 billion professionals, 180 million senior-level executives, and 10 million C-level executives. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. They'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. To claim that, just go to linkedin.com/designbetter. That's linkedin.com/designbetter. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, it's the place to be. Web designers, this one's for you. I've got 1 minute to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things that you can do from start to finish in 1 minute or less on Studio. You can adapt your designs for every device using responsive AI, reuse assets like templates, widgets, sections, and design libraries across sites and share them with your team. Switch up the styling of hundreds of web pages. That means fonts, layouts, colors, all in a click. Add no-code animations and gradient backgrounds right in the editor. Export your designs from Figma to Wix Studio in just a click. Oh, and one more big one. Package and deliver everything your client needs in one smooth handover. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. And now, back to the show.
So, Enrique, a large part of our audience is probably curious about entrepreneurship, and also it's a challenging time right now if you are looking for a role within a traditional company as a designer or designer adjacent role. It's a challenging time, and so people might be curious, or just by necessity looking for something that they can do on their own or with a partner. And so, sort of to that point, to the partner point, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you found your own partner, Ben, how you guys kind of view your complementary skill set. I know with Aaron and I and Design Better, we had a great chance to work together before we kind of pulled this out of the mothership, but we have identified these complementary things that just make it so much better. Like, I've had partners before where we got along great, but our goals were misaligned, or there's so many things that could happen in a partnership, whether that's a startup or agency, whatever route you end up taking. But yeah, maybe talk us through that a little bit, looking for a partner and what kind of qualities you might want to be looking out for.
In some ways, I hate to admit that it's almost like finding someone you're going to marry, right? Like it's so challenging for so many people to find a long-term partner, right? That fits all these criteria, right? That's right place, right time. All these things kind of have to kind of conspire to fit. In many ways, a co-founder is like that. My wife had to remind me, she's like, man, you're spending all this time when we were starting Design Fund, working long hours, weekends. You're just like, dude, this guy's, your co-founder, but hey, don't forget, like I'm your co-founder for life. Okay. Like don't forget that. Right. So I think in the same way, like having that perspective that not to put too much pressure on it, but just to recognize that in some ways it can't be forced, right? Where you need to go through a natural process of getting to know that person, of working on something together, stress testing, figuring out where you guys might break, right? Like I love Esther Perel and other, relationship coaches and stuff where like, they talk about, hey, when everything is going great and everything's fun and you're in the honeymoon phase of a relationship, that's not really a great indicator of like the long-term viability of your partnership. What really is like, hey, can we get down to like, what's your crazy? Like, what are the things that trigger you? What are the things that make it really challenging for you to work with another, right? Like, until you kind of get to that kind of stuff, it's really hard. And so I think the best way is just by working on projects together. So with Ben, we had a great couple years we hacked on a side project, peace.facebook.com, that's no longer up. We had hackathons. We got to help advise companies together unofficially and officially, got to angel invest together. So we had like kind of a couple years really to develop both our friendship and our working relationship. And then it just became like natural to like kind of take that next leap. But we had the hard conversation up front of like, okay, Ben's going to leave this super cush opportunity at Facebook. Like, all right, what do we need to have in place, right? What kind of funding do we need to have in place? What kind of customers or contracts do we need to have in place to make sure that that is a viable thing for him to do? So I think also recognizing that people, your co-founders, are each going to be coming from different places and might have different needs for their family or for their personal life. And so that's also like a really important thing to kind of align on. We were blessed that we had the opportunity to take a lot of risk. We had, savings at Runaway, right? Like that may not be the case for everyone to be able to do that. And so I think that's another piece that often isn't talked about, but like, yeah, just the realities of responsibilities that people may have in their personal life and making sure that aligns. And then in terms of complementary skill sets, I'm really glad that you brought that up. For us, oftentimes what we're looking for in teams when we want to invest, like the ideal team for us has this like trifecta of not just like great engineering and technical prowess, which I think is essential and like foundational, also great domain and like business expertise, like someone who's really like lived and breathed this problem space, and someone who has amazing design experience. Again, whether they're a formal designer or a founder that really values design and is willing to invest in it. We really want to find that trifecta of great engineering, tech expertise, business and domain expertise, and design expertise. And I think the reason that's the case, or I think why that helps create outcomes, is I believe Ed Catmull talks about this from Pixar, that there needs to be like a healthy tension between business, the creative side of things, and tech that kind of helps balance out. And when they all find a way to harmonize, create things that are just incredible, right? And so that's what we love to look for, is when teams have that complementary expertise. And I think the reason why the technical piece is important is that oftentimes they can build and ship and iterate a lot faster. So time to market is quicker. So that's more efficient from a funding perspective, right? How much capital does it take to reach a certain milestone? From a business domain expertise, there's plenty of examples of people who are complete noobs or outsiders who didn't know anything about a space. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be from the establishment per se, but like someone that just intimately has an understanding of the problem. And then that helps shortcut a lot of the mistakes of building the kind of the wrong thing when you really are kind of like building for yourself. So that's why a lot of geeks, entrepreneurs end up building stuff for themselves because it's just they intimately know themselves better than they know others, right? But we want to find that whether it's in health, whether it's in sustainability or in financial services, folks that just have this really intimate understanding of the problem space. And then, of course, the design expertise. I don't need to tell you guys about that, but ultimately, it's becoming really important that people have taste, right? And can kind of distinguish between what's like good and okay and like what's really excellent. And so, again, that's hard to really like train and teach, but founders oftentimes are like directors of movies or like editors where they have to make calls that are subjective that when you add up all these little calls that they make turn into this overall composition and experience. And that's something that, again, is really important that hopefully someone on the founding team has some of that taste.
I love that. Taste is such an important thing. We have heard the exact same advice from cinematographers. So those listening who might be thinking about starting a business at some point, historically during downturns or economic turmoil, that's when the most businesses are created. And we're sort of coming out of that, I think. It's hard to say for sure, fingers crossed. But what does it take to start a business? Like, what's the advice that you usually give to budding entrepreneurs about getting off the ground?
We talked about team and finding a partner, similar to finding a life partner that you can really go the distance with. Talk about finding complementary expertise. So team, from an investment perspective is, especially amongst early stage investors, is so critical. Many people make bets. It's like, it doesn't even matter what the person or the team is doing, but we're just betting on this team to figure it out, right? And so I think just not to underemphasize the importance of team. The next that I would say is really about market. And so one of the things I've learned, and I appreciated this while surfing as well, is that even if you have best design, like hand-shaped board, like beautiful, like wax, everything, nice custom, everything, fins, if there's no waves, probably not going to catch any waves, right? Like there's no swell, it's probably flat and you're not going to have a great time out there. And in a similar way, you can have the best product per se or amazing experience that has all this, bells and whistles. But if there isn't a big market opportunity, a big wave, probably not going to build something that's going to become super significant from a business perspective. And so I think it's really important that folks spend more time from like a business school perspective, like market opportunity analysis, and to really understand that there's really customers here that want your product, that are willing to pay, and that there's enough of them to create the kind of outcome that that founder aspires to. And so there's lots of different resources and approaches, where that's more of a customer development approach or more of a tops down approach. But ultimately what I like to see is that there's both a bottoms up and a tops down thinking around the market opportunity. So when I mean bottoms up, it's like, okay, hey, we want to build this product it's going to cost $10 to make, and we're going to sell it for $100, and we have this nice margin of 90, and we've gone out and like either through interviews or through our prototypes, we've shown that people want this. And if we times 100 times, 1,000,000 folks in the United States, which is only a small fraction of the overall market, we could get to a significant run rate and we could be a potentially sustainable business. So I love that kind of like bottoms up from like the very simple like unit economics to like how this company can get to $1 million annual revenue to say 10 million to 100 million, right? So having like a plausible, like it seems plausible that we can get there, right? We don't have to serve every person in the United States, which is unrealistic. Even if we just are able to service a realistic amount, like, do you know 1,000 people? Can we like find 1,000 people who want this product? Is that realistic, right? Like, can we find 10,000 people that want this product? Is that realistic, or is that like a big stretch? And so that kind of just basic back of the envelope stress testing, it's really helpful to be educated, honestly, from a founder who has expertise and has talked or spoken with or, has serviced those folks. And then there's kind of like the tops down, right? Whether that's from market reports or from market trends that kind of show that this market is potentially growing, or that maybe there's already existing players, like we talked about with Gusto. There's maybe existing incumbents that already show this is a big market opportunity, but they're like sleepy incumbents. And so there's opportunity to kind of carve out a percentage of their market share. If we could kind of like, again, produce a better, mobile experience or whatever, a better experience for SMBs. And then there's kind of the third case of like, hey, Uber or Airbnb, they created markets. I mean, that's the biggest opportunities. If you can create whole new market opportunities, it's a harder to pitch and like for investors necessarily buy. But if someone has a conviction and investor can kind of recognize and maybe be contrary and right, I mean, that's some of the biggest outcomes, right? Whatever the SpaceXs of the world, right? The Ubers, the Lyfts, the Airbnbs, like these have really took existing human behavior or existing innovation and then really expanded that into much bigger than anyone would have projected, any analysts would have projected, right? There's like the funny example of, was it McKinsey who like tried to initially project the mobile phone penetration? And it was like, there's going to be a few million people. I'm like, nope, they were completely wrong about that prediction, right? It's like, oh no, this technology totally opened up whole new opportunities. And we're seeing that obviously with AI as well. So team, market, and then product. Those are kind of the big three areas that I would really focus on at the early stages: team, market, product. And from a product perspective, if I was really going to cut to the chase, we really tried to look for like the sharpest, fine-tuned like wedge where we don't have to have a lot of features, but find that this solution that really solves this like clear pain point, painkiller. It's a painkiller for someone. It's not nice to have. And I think that's really the really hard part is there's a lot of things that you could potentially build oftentimes, but can we really hone in on this like kernel, this atom of what makes up the core of this product value prop. And then if we demonstrate that people want this, people are willing to pay for this, then we could add on other things that expand the contract value. And so that's got to be kind of the biggest thing is I'm looking for this like simple kernel of demand and a value that then we can expand to from there. Because sometimes people build something that's like amazing and sharp in this little wedge, but then there's not much willingness to pay or opportunity to expand from there. So, I'll give you an example. Ambrook, one of our portfolio companies that helps provide financial services to farms, to all sorts of different agricultural endeavors to help make sustainability more profitable. Part of their thesis is, oh, wow, if we're able to help farms be more profitable, let's say with like a spend card so they can manage more of the finances and see kind of which crops, are more profitable and help get access to more funding. But if we can kind of start with this like really basic thing of like, how profitable is this particular field, right? If we could kind of like start with that pain point as an example, we could then expand to a lot of features around that, right? So not only a spend card, but a checking account, access to credit, be able to file your taxes and streamline that process, right? So it kind of can expand to a whole suite of financial services, but really like honing in on like, what is that really like initial pain point of like helping farmers better understand how they're spending money and what are things that are most profitable that they should be continuing to do. Like they can help folks answer that question. It earns them the right to expand into a lot more surface area.
Enrique, so diving a little bit further into the types of businesses that somebody out there who's got a design background might start, doesn't necessarily have to be a venture-backed business. And certainly if you're a freelancer or you're starting an agency with a partner, you would look at that type of investment to start your business. But maybe you talk a little bit about if I'm somebody who's starting a product business and, here in Silicon Valley, it's kind of, I think, unfortunately looked down upon if you just want to do a lifestyle quote unquote business where you're bootstrapping and paying your way through the product you sell. But if somebody's coming to you and asking, is venture the right path for me? How do you advise them depending on what they're bringing to you?
Don't take venture if you don't need it. It's not for everyone, and it's not the right solution. It's expensive. You're giving up ownership, right, in exchange for venture, right? I'm a big advocate of founders finding opportunities for non-dilutive capital. So whether that's grants, whether that's projects that they do in a consulting capacity where they get to retain the IP of what they're building, whether that's just directly selling their goods or services and making money the old-fashioned way, like whatever you could do to generate revenue or to get access to capital, I would try to do that, exhaust those possibilities as much as possible before really considering venture. The reason why I'm saying venture isn't for everyone is that fundamentally, like how the incentives work is that VCs are swinging for the fences. They're swinging for like huge multi-billion-dollar outcomes. The reason that they're swinging for multi-billion-dollar outcomes is because most of the companies that we invest in fail or return a small amount of capital. So it's already these like very few like winners, these outliers at the top of the power law that generate the vast returns for the whole fund and for the whole industry, really. And so it's kind of this like really interesting dynamic where if you're not a big winner, it's almost like it doesn't matter. It's not material to the financial outcome of these entities. And that's not great. If you're a founder, it's like, this is my life's work. This is what I've like put my whole life savings into. This is what my blood, sweat, and tears, right? Like, hey, if I build $1 million business or $10 million business or $50 million business, like that's awesome. Like that's great. So that just may not be a multi-billion-dollar company that then again has to either sell and get acquired or sell at secondary or go public to generate liquidity to make returns for VCs and for other investors. So I think the examples like Calendly, if you kind of listen to the story, pretty incredible bootstrap approach to entrepreneurship, didn't need to raise money and was already profitable and then decided to capitalize that business to further grow. So I think once you already have something that's working, or you have some product market fit, venture could be the right solution, or venture debt and those other instruments, but could be the right solution if you're trying to rapidly grow fast and expand, maybe not just the US, but internationally. And so there are examples where venture can really help you outcompete because you just have more resources to expand and build. Whereas if you're just bootstrapping, it would take a lot longer and you might lose a lot of market share in that time frame. So the good news is, though, there are so many more resources for founders and entrepreneurs than when we were first starting Design Fund. It's incredible. Literally, even amidst a downturn in the United States, in hubs like Silicon Valley, in New York, in major areas, LA, up in the Pacific Northwest, say around Seattle, like in these kind of tech hubs, there's angel investors, there's incubators, there's accelerators, there's pre-seed funds, there's seed funds, there's Series A, B, C, like kind of for every stage, there are different sources of capital for entrepreneurs. And that choice ultimately is great, I think, for innovation, for competition. And so the other way that I would approach it is, okay, say, you've exhausted, your savings, you've done as much as you can to consult and kind of have a side hustle or do some entrepreneurship at your company. Maybe you can incubate something within your company, right? Like you've exhausted all routes, maybe going to friends and family for some type of funding. I recognize that's not always the case for folks depending on their background or whatnot. Gone to maybe your university or other affinity groups that you might be associated with, right? Like really go to anybody that knows you and that might want to take a bet on you. You need to go talk to them, right? So literally need to canvas every single person who loves you, basically. If you've exhausted all of that, then yeah, probably approaching angel investors and accelerators and incubators might be a really great fit. Again, depending on the founder's background and connections. And there's a number of pre-seed funds as well too. So I would say it depends on the founding team's background and their connections. It depends on the type of company that they're building. But I would probably, after you've exhausted friends and family, try to get a few angel investors spot on, try to apply to a few programs. And you could always say no, but you can just go through the process of applying, try to reach out to some select pre-seed funds. The reason why I'm saying angels, accelerators, incubators, and pre-seed is because these are oftentimes investors who understand the early stages. A big mistake that I often see is people try to go pitch later stage or multi-stage VCs who have a much higher bar for what they want to see from the product, the metrics, revenue, and it's a misaligned fit. They're looking for something that is already working, essentially. You need to find investors who are willing to take risk when you might be pre-product or you might be pre-revenue. And that's a very different mindset and a very different approach. And for us, we're trying to increase access to funding. So we recently opened up an application that you can go to designerfund.com/partnership, where any entrepreneur or founder from around the world can apply for up to $1 million in funding, from pre-seed, if you just have an idea, all the way to Series A, and maybe you already have something that's cooking. And one of the reasons that we decide to do that is we recognize that we want to give everyone like a fair shot to be able to get funding and not just have to rely on referrals through kind of in-network, old boys club. We recognize that some of the best companies and incredible founders can really come from anywhere. And so that's one of the big reasons why we're doing that. But again, we're not the only source of capital. There's many others. I would just really focus on coming up with a focused game plan and approach where it's almost like a full-time job. Fundraising is not like something you kind of like do a little bit here, sprinkle in a couple meetings here and there. It's like, no, if like you've exhausted all those other things and you're really committed and you're saying, hey, I want to get $1 million or whatever, $500,000 or $250,000, whatever the number is, to get me to this next milestone of the product or be able to serve X amount of customers, you really need to focus really full time on fundraisers. It's not something that's easy to do sort of part time. And I think that's something that first time founders or folks who haven't fundraised before, it's a bit of a shock because it's like, oh, I'm going to have to experience a lot of no's. I'm going to have to experience a lot of rejection. I'm going to have to reach out to 100 people so I get one or two to say yes, right? It's uncomfortable. It can be grating. It can be demoralizing, right? But like, that's part of the fire of entrepreneurship and kind of test your mettle. And honestly, raising funding for some of the first rounds is actually in some ways easier than some of your later rounds, because in the early days, you're raising on a vision. You're painting this picture of what could be or showing early signals of potential growth, but you don't have the data yet necessarily to back it up. But as you get later on, hey, you've been working on this thing for a year or 2 years, products are in the market, like it's not a rocket ship. So what's going on, right? So it's actually in some ways raising particularly Series A can be much harder because folks are actually looking for true signals of product market fit.
Enrique, tell us what's been inspiring to you this year. What are you reading, watching, listening to that's really got you inspired?
Well, one guilty pleasure I'll admit is I have been watching this season 2 of The Rings of Power. So for all of you Lord of the Rings nerds in the audience, one of the reasons why I like it is that it does kind of focus on, in some ways, the corruptibility and redemption of human nature and the temptation of power and of control, not to mention the beautiful, incredible aesthetics. I know some people have some qualms with the actors or whatnot, but I still enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, Enrique, where can people learn more about you, the work you're doing, and Designer Fund?
Yeah, so the best place to learn more about Designer Fund is just designerfund.com. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter or X, I'm just at Enrique Allen, or LinkedIn at Enrique Allen as well. I'm not a huge posters. So don't worry if you follow. I'm not going to blow up your inbox. So I occasionally post some updates about our companies as well as some of my own personal reflections.
Thanks, Enrique. Thanks for being on the show.
All right. Take care, guys.
In this episode of Inside Studio from Design Better, we chat with Kyle Prinsloo, founder of ClientManager.io. Kyle's been using Wix Studio to work on his own products, which help freelancers and agencies, and he spoke about the efficiency of the Wix Studio ecosystem, particularly the back-end features like its impressive email marketing tools. He also notes that his email campaigns, like group calls or webinars, receive much higher open rates compared to other platforms.
My name is Kyle Prinsloo. And my holding company is KBP Holdings. That's where everything is. And then my public agency is Startup Starship. I've got a few different other things, like Freelance Fam is a big thing where I spend a lot of my time as a community for freelance web designers and developers. The difference between working on your business and in your business is the following. In your business is, let's say there's 8 hours in a day. I'm delivering client work that is working in my business. On the business would be like, I'm doing client work for 4 or 6 hours of the day or even less. And the rest I'm working on trying to get new clients, or the rest I'm working on trying to find new partners or outsourcing or delegating or looking for tools and ways to make my business more efficient, right? This is obviously a broad topic, but I think it starts with an audit, right? So look at your current way of doing things. Is there a way that you can make it better, right? And when I mean success in terms of an agency, yes, I'm referring to revenue numbers, of course, but I'm also referring to, your stress levels, your freedom, your flexibility as well. Because I think we all know many people who are working like 12-hour days, 14-hour days, getting burnt out, working on weekends. They've got the revenue, fantastic revenue, perhaps even great profits, but they're neglecting other areas, And if that's success, that's fine. But for me, I think it should be a holistic approach, where it's like you're working less, you've got other benefits, business is doing well, you're outsourcing, then I think it's a good business. Why Wix Studio? I'm not here to badmouth other, platforms, right? I think there's pros and cons for every platform. I think they are fantastic platforms. Just my objective research, if I compare the features, scalability, support, UX, outcome, savings, price, value, all of those things combined, I think it's actually undeniable that Wix Studio comes out on top, and if you look at it objectively just on features alone, it comes out on top. I think the one thing that stands out to me in terms of working smart, making websites fast, is the templates, or like the website themes basically, are all included in like one plan, right? So let's say I wanted to build a website for a construction company. Let's say I've got a construction company client. I don't have to like sign up to a plan and pay for like a website template or something like that. That is like all included, and I can look for a few different examples. So what's nice about that is I don't have to rely on a third party. And the other thing is, let's say I did have to buy a theme or work on that client. If I needed to scale that, like maybe there's certain dynamic or custom elements that I need, I don't have to rely on like a bad plugin that's not secure that I need to keep paying every time, and then it breaks and then it affects, my operating system like some platforms, right? So that has been massive. Like literally when I moved over from those platforms to this, it's been really, really beneficial. Something that recently came out is the Figma to Wix Studio plugin, which I think is like insane, right? So you can create something awesome on Figma literally in a few minutes and cover that in some videos. The outcome is, I wouldn't say it's 100%. I would say it's about 90%, 95%, depending on how complex, it is. And that's like a game changer, I think. Besides that, I think the user experience is a big one. And then for me, another one is the support, So when you've got a good community, good support, you've got some issues, literally I can post it in my community, like within a couple of hours, it'll be sorted, So I love that aspect of it. I think what's nice about the Wix Studio is it's the whole ecosystem of things, right? So it's like you just see the front end side of the website and it's like, oh, okay, the website looks cool or it looks okay, whatever your subjective opinion is. But on the back end side, one thing which I really found insane is the email side. It might sound simple, but the email marketing side is really good. Like every week I send out, a group call or a webinar or something. And the open rate that I get on those emails versus sending myself or through another platform It's really insane. And what you pay for that is hardly anything. And then if you wanted to build like a live chat or any other elements in a way, it's there. Clientmanager.io, that's my SaaS. So I mentioned earlier that I do other different things, and that's one of the things that I'm focused on. And that's a simple client onboarding and management tool. So if you're a freelancer, agency, small business, big business, we can help send intake forms, proposals, all of those types of things, right? Manage clients and all of that.
To learn more about Wix Studio, go to dbtr.co/Wix Studio. That's dbtr.co/WIXSTUDIO.
This episode was produced by Eli Woolery and me, Aaron Walter, with engineering and production support from Brian Paik of Pacific Audio. If you found this episode useful, we hope that you'll leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to finer shows. Or simply drop a link to the show in your team's Slack channel, designbetterpodcast.com. It'll really help others discover the show. Until next time.